Hello, my name is Carsten Lange. I made this video to introduce a teaching strategy that helps to teach money creation and money supply. The teaching strategy utilizes the interactive teaching simulation money supply. Students are expected to develop the following skills: understand the money creation process, understand the importance of interbank loans, understand how banks and the central banks interact to produce M1, and finally, understand the money multiplier concept. The money supply simulation runs inside a web browser. That means instructors or students have nothing else to do than type in the URL and start the simulation. The simulation comes up with an accounting framework that is very similar to the one used in most textbooks. Depending on the scenario that the student or instructor chooses, it provides different economic actions. And when these actions are executed, automatically the appropriate dollar amounts are generated inside the accounting framework. Each scenario is accompanied by a webinar, which is a short video that students can watch after they have covered the topics in class. The best way to learn how to teach with a money supply simulation is to see it in action. The instructor in the classroom chooses a basic scenario with one bank and no cash withdrawals. And we see two actions here, and one of them says the central bank buys $10 security from First Savings. When we execute it, we can see that securities are reduced by $10 for First Savings, while the central bank has more assets now. At the same time, the central bank pays for the security by crediting First Savings reserve account, and that is a liability of the central bank. Now, First Saving can actually originate a loan. And the moment they originate the loan, they create deposits because the loan is funded into a deposit account. And $100 deposits means that money has already been created. When we adjust the required reserves, we see that the excess reserves will turn into required reserves because the reserve ratio is 10%. That leaves no further room for First Savings to create more money. The intermediate simulation considers multi-banks and introduces the federal funds market. As we can see here, First Savings has sold securities to the central bank and received excess reserves, while the US loan bank originated a loan and credited deposits, but it is not able to fulfill their required reserves. If at the federal funds market, US loan gets a loan of $10 from First Savings, then the excess reserves from First Savings will be transferred to US loan and they are able to fulfill their required reserves. The advanced scenario introduces cash withdrawals in a multi-bank environment. Here one bank, the First Savings Bank, is already equipped with $20 of reserves, has originated a loan and therefore deposits, and fulfills its required reserves. Now we explain students that the customer wants to withdraw $10 from their deposits. Since the First Savings Bank cannot print the money, First Savings has to buy the cash from the central bank using their excess reserves. If we click here, First Savings loses the excess reserves. The deposits of the customers go down to 90, and M1 now consists out of 90 deposits and 10 currency. When we adjust the required reserves, we can see that required reserves are now 9 and excess reserves have gone down to 1. In the advanced scenario, students already learned that both required reserve and currency demand drain banks' reserves and thus stop money creation. The instructor can introduce the money multiplier simulation by asking the question, how much money can banks potentially create when the reserves are given? The simulation goes step by step, period by period. It assumes that banks originate loans that are equal to their excess reserves, 10 in that case. Then the simulation adjusts the currency withdrawals and required reserves here, 0.95, required reserves for 9.52 deposits, and totally the customers have withdrawn approximately $1. Banks give new loans, in this case approximately $9.50, adjust currency and reserves, and we're in period 3. Same thing repeats again. We reach period 4, and we could do that over and over again until the reserves are used up. But here's an option to run the next 100 rounds. We are in period 104, and we can see that M1 is a total of 140 and that the monetary base is 20. So 20 times 7 equals 140. Students often ask us how are textbook models related to the real world. Here we can show that pretty easily. If we click on the Empirical Data tab, we can go to exactly the same framework that we used before, and it is filled with real data. These data are drawn on the fly from the Federal Reserve. They are always up to date. It's also possible to choose different data for different years. If we again click on the Empirical Data tab, we can download a chart that shows how the monetary base developed over time. Again, the data are drawn from the Federal Reserve database. That means the chart is always up to date and can be adjusted to different time frames. The chart shows not only how the monetary base developed over time and increased dramatically, it shows also the component and thus shows which role mortgage-backed securities played as part of the monetary base.